Hello, everybody. My name is Linda Abraham, and I am the president of Accepted and the moderator for today's webinar. I've been a medical school admissions consultant for just about 27 years, and the panelists that you're going to be hearing from have even more experience. So we look forward to sharing it with you today. If you've not downloaded and printed out the worksheet for today's presentation, I invite you to do so now. Here again is the link. It's in your chat window. Okay. Let's test your hand raising skill. And I'm sure you're all experts at Zoom right now. So if you could raise your hands if you want to go to medical school in order to pursue your dream career. Okay. Again, raise your hands if you want to go to medical school in order to pursue your dream career. We're all Zoom experts, right? Okay, well, most of you are here for the right reasons. That's good. Good start to the masterclass and the Q&A. Let's test your, please post your questions throughout the Q&A. Please post your questions in the question window. Please post your answers to any of our questions in the chat window. That's going to make this thing go a lot faster, be a lot more effective and efficient. Last point, when you leave, you're going to receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback and we use it. Oh, and one more thing before I introduce today's experts. I've been told that webinar attendees are so curious about the special offer at the end that they forget to pay attention to its content. I don't want that to happen to you. So here's the scoop. You can beat Accepted's March 15th price increase by purchasing our services on or before March 14th. It's not going to be a big price increase, but if you want that money in your pocket, then again, purchase before them. Finally, I'm thrilled to introduce our experts. Sydney Foote, an Accepted med school admissions consultant since 2001, previously served an administrative role in University of Washington's medical school. Dr. Herman Gordon, former chairman of the admissions committee at the University of Arizona Medical School, and Accepted med school admissions consultant since 2014. And Dr. Barry Rothman, founder and former director of several Postback programs at Cal State University at San Francisco, and Accepted med school admissions consultant since 2015. Now, we also have a couple of polls for you, and I'm going to pose them now, at least the first one. Here we go. When I apply next, I will be a first-time grad school applicant or a med school reapplicant. First-time med school applicant or first-time med school reapplicant are the questions, okay? And let's see, we are now at 78% having voted. Anybody? Okay, we're over 85%. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end the poll, and here are the results. 50-50. Whoa. Okay. All right. That's interesting. Pretty evenly split. And then the next question is, let me stop sharing. When do you plan to submit your application, your primary application? Here you go. And the options are June, July, August, September. Well, it can't be much later because of the deadline, but anyways, you get the idea. Okay, yeah, again, when do you plan to submit your primary application? And the options are June, July, August, or September or later. Could be a following cycle. All right. And if you're not sure, just put the one that's most likely. With 87% having voted, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 93%. Okay, great. 64% of you say June, and 21% say July, and 0 say August, and 14% say September or later. And I hope that's actually a later cycle. All right, great. Now, last question for you, and this I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Let's see, let me just share the results so you can see it. Again, 64% is June, 21% is July, 0% is August, 14% is September or later. Thank you very much for your participation. And let's go here. Now, I'm just curious, how many of you applied this cycle and haven't heard back yet from the medical schools? You're essentially in limbo. If you could raise your hands to indicate if that's you. And raise your hand if you're in limbo because you haven't heard back yet from the medical schools. All right, it's about 26, 27% of you. No, about 20%. Third, actually. Okay, we got it up to a third in limbo. That's pretty frustrating, but it does happen. Okay, Let's face it, it's hard to get accepted to medical school. The process is long, difficult, and grueling. In my opinion, of all the graduate and professional programs, medical school has the most demanding application process. And you can see on the screen, and these numbers are from 2019, they don't account for the application surge that has occurred this cycle, and which most of us on the panel believe will continue for at least the next cycle. In December, NPR quoted the AAMC as saying that the number of applicants is up about 18%, and they dubbed the increase the Fauci effect. Individual schools are reporting, in some cases, even larger increases in application volume. For instance, Stanford reported a 50% increase at one point, and BU a 27% increase. And of course, medical school isn't just about the stats. It's not just about the Mcat score and the GPA, as important as they are. Med school admissions offices are very serious about holistic review. Schools want to see commitment to service, the ability to work in teams, exposure to clinical healthcare, and professionalism. And they expect to see all of that and more through your medical school applications. On a very high level, the primary application, whether for DO programs or MD programs, is about your fitness to serve as a physician. It should show the following: your ability, your academic ability is number one. You have to show them that you will do well in medical school. They don't want people to drop out. Clinical exposure. They want to know that you know what a clinical career in medicine is about and are making an informed, realistic decision. And then the E is essence, mainly because I needed an E, and that stands for your personal qualities. Doctors should have compassion, communications ability, a love of service, teamwork skills, and leadership ability. The secondary applications and interviews should, in addition, reinforce the points made in the primary and show fit with the individual schools you are applying to. In terms of content and focus, that's how you will ace your medical school applications and get accepted despite the surge. The other key ingredient, is time, lots of it. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a time-consuming, grueling process, so allow for time. It's not a marathon, it's a marathon rather, not a sprint, and you have to plan for it like a marathon because it takes months to apply. It's March now, as you're all aware. You presumably have already taken some steps to prepare yourself, even if you're a first-time applicant, to apply in terms of your coursework and activities. It could easily be more than a year from today before you know for sure if you are starting medical school in 2022, even if you apply in June of 2021. That's just the reality of it. And we saw that actually when I asked how many people are in limbo, and it was just about a third of the people who are here. So how do you prepare for this marathon? What kind of steps can you take? Well, first of all, train or prepare for the Mcat. Prepare and get the best score you can the first time you're taking it. If you have to retake, of course you retake. There's no question and there's no shame in that. But first, give it your best and your all going out. And then investigate the different programs that you can apply to the programs most likely to accept you based on your qualifications, shared values and strengths, and the preference and the school's preference for in-state versus out-of-state students and where you're located. Then there's the MMEs, personal statement, and activity descriptions. And some of the panelists have said, Linda, you should put personal statement first. And I could put personal statement first, but then I wouldn't have the time acronym. So yes, the personal statement is very important, but so are the MMEs and so are the activity descriptions. Those are the written portions of your application. Those are the parts that you have complete control over at this point in time. And if you invest time in them, they're going to be better and they're going to contribute to your acceptance. And then equip yourself to handle the deluge of secondaries by pre-writing the most common secondaries or the ones you are most likely to get during the lull after you submit your primary and before secondaries start to come. The next thing you can do is get someone experienced, knowledgeable, and objective while still being supportive to guide you through the process. Given the complexity of the application process and the odds, you need a guide who knows the process inside and out and who can support you through this grueling journey. Let Accepted be your guide. Access professional expert advice, save time, apply with confidence, and apply successfully. We survey our clients, and last year, 91% of our client respondents were accepted to medical school. In a nutshell, you get candor and objectivity, combined with decades of experience in medical school admissions by your side as you go through the tough application process. Now, let's meet a few of Accepted's outstanding guides. We'll answer your questions during this Q&A and are available to work with you in the future. Again, Sydney Foote, an Accepted Med School admissions consultant since 2001. Dr. Herman Gordon, former chairman of the admissions committee at the University of Arizona Medical School in Tucson, and an Accepted Med School admissions consultant since 2014. And Dr. Barry Rothman, founder and former director of several Postback programs at Cal State San Francisco, and an Accepted Med School admissions consultant since 2015. And now I'd like to take your questions. So you're welcome to pose them at any point in time. I do have some questions that I prepared, and I'm going to take advantage of my position here and start with them. So the first question I have for all of you is, given the application surge, what adjustments do applicants have to make? And I'll tell you what, I'm going to pick on Sid to start.
Thanks.
Anytime.
So there's a lot of adjustments in terms of, I think one of the biggest things that people have had to get used to is interviews and doing all of that virtually. That's been a big challenge for a lot of people. And I think it has contributed to the competitiveness of the cycle, because in the past, you might not be able to afford to go to all of your interviews, but now it's just time on Zoom. So more people are interviewing. So that's a huge adjustment that I think a lot of people are struggling with. In terms of getting the basic requirements for medical school, it's very difficult in times of COVID. And this is something that I think the applicants this year are going to be struggling with just as much. You can't get shadowing experience. It's very hard to get clinical experience. A lot of extracurricular activities have been either cut back or eliminated. So I don't have a lot of easy answers. It takes some creativity to, I think, get around, to find ways to still volunteer, to find ways to get the clinical experience that you need. And it's, there's not an easy answer for everybody to have. It's pretty tailored for the circumstances each person's in.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sid. And Flash?
Oh, I totally agree. I think in general, everyone has to up their game. It's, I think people are getting a little fewer interviews. They're waiting longer to hear back from schools. It's just a more competitive environment out there. The bar has been raised.
Yes, I agree that it does seem like people are hearing back later. I wonder if some of that lateness had to do with the fact that the whole cycle was moved slightly later. Mm-hmm. So that I don't think that's going to happen necessarily next cycle, because they couldn't take the Mcat until late June. But everything else I completely agree with. And Barry, what do you want to add?
Well, I would add, first of all, I agree with what Sid and Flash said. And I would add that this is a time to work on your stress handling skills. You're going to need them anyhow for your career. And this is a really great opportunity to deal with interviews coming late and the frustration of maybe having difficulty finding clinical experience. So think about ways that you can manage stress. I like yoga and meditation. Those aren't the only ways. Lots of aerobic exercise can help. There are many ways that you can be proactive and take care of yourself instead of just feeling like a victim of the circumstances.
Right, for sure. I'd also like to suggest that that I think you need to be a little bit more realistic about where you apply. If you apply to all programs where your MCAT is below average and your GPA is below average, and that's based on the stats from 2 years ago, you're probably not applying realistically. If you apply exclusively to programs outside your home state, you're probably not applying realistically, especially to public institutions outside your home state that have a clear preference for in-state applicants. So there's a lot to be said. And then the other thing I think that's really, really important is this whole concept of fit. If are you demonstrating interest in the programs that you're applying to by attending their events? They're all online now. Are you choosing schools based on your most likely interests and their strengths? Have you really looked into what the values are and the mission are? So those are some other things I think that are going to become more. I think that concept of fit and identification is just going to be more and more common. Now we are getting some questions from our audience, which is great. So Jade is asking, do you expect the same increased competitiveness for the upcoming 2021 summer cycle? And if so, would you recommend waiting until the next 2022 cycle if it's possible? We're going to go in the opposite order this time. Okay, Barry, you want to start?
Yes, okay.
Great question. Thank you.
I don't think we really know how competitive this next cycle will be. It could be that we're going to have a surge just like we had during this present cycle, or it could be that things calm down a little bit and we get a normal or even less than normal set of applications. I have no idea how it's going to turn out. So I think we just need to be prepared for any eventuality. Now, what was the second part of that question, Linda?
If it's going to be as competitive, would you recommend waiting until the next cycle? In other words, if this is the 2022 matriculation cycle that we're looking at right now, until 2023?
I think that's a very nuanced answer, and it depends on a lot of details in terms of your preparation and how competitive you really are. I think you should get some help in thinking about how competitive you are, maybe from one of us, and make that decision based on that. I don't think there's enough information that I have about you, Jade, to give you a clear answer on that.
Okay. Flash, do you have anything to add?
So I agree with Barry that it's really hard to say. I think that there are so many factors in play. One thing I've noticed, though, is that the people I've been talking to as potential clients have almost all been or will be reapplicants. So they're spilling over from the last cycle into the next. The other thing I would mention is that if you're going to wait, I think waiting per se is a really bad idea. The admissions committee will see that and say, well, why did you wait? You were ready to apply before. So what was wrong? They're always looking for gaps in the timeline and trying to understand them. So if you're going to put off applying, you really need to have something good to be doing. Something that's really enhancing your application, hopefully really, a clinically relevant job. So. But if you're ready, now's the best time to apply. So.
Yeah. Sid, what would you add?
I agree. It's really hard to say. My gut feeling is that this next year is going to be just as competitive because of the overflow. One other thing, I think a lot of people thought this season was going to be very non-competitive at the beginning of the year. I kept hearing that. And I think that a lot of people probably who had been expecting to get a certain number of clinical hours or who had been expecting to have, medical missions that didn't take place and things like that, went ahead and applied. So they might not have been they might not have had everything in line like they would have in a normal year, but decided to take a chance on it. Now, whether those same people are going to take time to step back and actually get more clinical experience or whatever it is, and then reapply, there could be lags or there could be surges in future years. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but that's sort of what I'm seeing is people are going to be, as they get more competitive, they're going to go back to their core experiences and try to build those up a little bit more. So I think we're going to see effects of this for a while. And hopefully it will, the end goal is hopefully to get much more qualified applicants when you're ready to apply. I don't think necessarily though, Jade, like Barry and Gordon said, you don't want to just not apply just to try to avoid it from being competitive because it's always going to be competitive.
Yeah, I agree with that also. If you think you're ready, go for it. If you think you can materially improve your qualifications by waiting a year, that's something else. That's a different question. That's not the cycle question. That's a you question. Okay.
I would add,
Yeah.
Linda,
Go ahead.
that I see a number of people who apply prematurely, and sometimes they feel pressure from their family or just internal pressure or peer pressure. And to be really cautious of that, to waste the whole application cycle applying prematurely really wastes money and time and sets you back a whole cycle. So be really cautious and make sure you're really ready to apply.
I know another occasion, Barry, you said the fastest way to medical school is slowly.
Yes.
And I like that. It stuck. Okay, let's go on. We have more questions coming in. I invite attendees to post their questions. It's a little easier for me if you put it in the question window, but not a big deal if you do it in the chat window. Okay, from Morgan. Do you foresee a lot of waitlist movement later in the cycle, I assume this cycle, due to the increased amount of virtual interview invites that were accepted versus the amount of students who end up matriculating? I'm not sure I understand the second part of the question, but the first part is, do you foresee a lot of waitlist movement later in this cycle? Okay, tell you what, Flash, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I certainly hope so. I have a lot of clients who are stressing about being on the wait list. It's actually very early days still. But I think what is different this cycle is that people are still interviewing. And I think that then pushes the wait list later, or the movement off the wait list until later, because admissions committees haven't interviewed everybody yet, so they don't know what's coming in the pipe.
Right.
And once they've processed all of that, then I think the wait list will move like it normally does. So.
Anybody want to add? I'll tell you what, Barry, you want to go next? You have anything to add to that? Will the traffic rules affect
As
movement?
long as the traffic rules stay the same, I don't know if they'll be pushed back also. I don't know if our other panelists have any information about that, but I assume that the traffic rules won't change and that the applicants will have to choose one school if they're admitted to multiple schools. They'll have to choose one school at the end of April, beginning of May. So that's kind of squishes the waitlist issue into the time before then. So yes, I do think that the wait lists will be cleared more slowly and later, but they have to be cleared by the time of the traffic rule.
Okay, great. And Sid, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say by next Monday, the traffic rules specify that the schools have to accept it or granted admissions offers to as many students as they'll have in their class. There's been no news about that being pushed off, so I assume it's still a valid date for them, which is really disheartening for the client I interviewed today, whose interview isn't until the 23rd. So, it's like you're interviewing for the wait list. But I think that there is going to be waitlist movement. I think it's coming. I just think it's going to be later this year than it normally is. And hopefully things will just start to sort themselves out like they usually do. But, unprecedented times.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, some really good questions coming in from an anonymous attendee asked, should you send updates directly to the Dean of Admissions or the administrative assistant for admissions or the committee in general? I think some of that depends on the instructions you get from the school, but let's ask our panelists. Tell you what, I don't remember who I started with last time. Barry, you want to start?
Sure. There's two kinds of letters that people send. One are letters of intent and one is an update. And letters of intent just say, yeah, I really do want to go to your school, which seems obvious since you applied to their school. So those are less effective. I think if you're going to send an update, it should really be an update and it should have some new information that will make you a better applicant. Let's say a new job or a new course or a new grade. All of those things would be very helpful in an update letter. I'd be very careful not to send lots and lots of update letters to the same school, maybe 1 or 2 during the entire cycle. And again, only if there's real updated information. As to whom to send the update letter to, as Linda pointed out, look at the instructions that the school sends you, and if in doubt, then just, I don't know, pick randomly and see what happens, or call the office and see if they have an idea as to where to address the update letter.
Okay. Flash or Sid, do you have anything to add to that? No. Oh, I said yes, you do.
I was just
Agree.
gonna say, I usually tell my clients to address it either to the Dean of Admissions or to members of the admissions committee. So
Okay.
just have a name on it if you can.
Right. Flash?
Yeah, no, I agree.
No. Okay. The other thing I would say is, try and find out if the school will pay attention to your update letter. Some schools
Hmm.
really welcome them, and some schools really just round file them. So,
And if you say not to send something, don't send something.
oh, absolutely.
Right.
Right.
The school portals are getting really good about telling applicants whether they want a letter or not.
Yeah. So anyway, that's that. Okay, let's go on. We have some really good questions here. Jim asks, is it better to go to California pre-med schools, as California has more med schools than Washington State? Per what was just said, the schools and students, residents accepted first. My son will be starting his pre-med school this year. I'll tell you what, Barry, since you're in California, do you want to take that?
I think the California schools take a lot of out-of-state applicants. And so I don't know if it's such a great advantage to move to California and get your pre-med education there just to try to get to a California med school. I would use other criteria in picking the pre-med school. Many schools have very excellent records and are good fits. The same idea as finding a medical school that's a good fit. Find the school that's the best fit. I'm not so sure that jockeying to be a resident of California is such a great strategy.
Okay. Sid or Flash, you have anything to add?
Want to go to the University of Washington, you should be a resident of Washington,
Yeah.
or Alaska, or Montana, or Idaho. It's very, very hard if you're out of the Webby area, or Wyoming too.
I think Alaska too.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely true that the density of med schools varies considerably across the country. So for Florida residents, you're really lucky because there are a lot of med schools who favor Florida residency. California, the problem is that you have to look at the density of how many applicants there are per how many schools there are, and it's not a good number.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. All right. Abhijit asks, thank you, Jim. Abhijit asks, how do you evaluate a relatively new med school like Kaiser Permanente in California or the brand new Marist College Med School in New York? Tell you what, I know, Flash, why don't you take that one first?
Okay, so Kaiser is incredible. They are giving a full ride, at least for the first 5 classes.
That's
and
right.
They're now accepting their 3rd class. And by full ride, they mean everything plus they give you $2,200 a month living allowance. So they're really trying hard. And as a result, rumor is that they've had over 20,000 applications for this cycle. And and it's for 50 slots. So that's 1 in 400, which makes it incredibly competitive. And it sounds like the students who are there are loving it. Kaiser had the advantage that they already had a well-established system, and they've been really smart about their med school. I don't know that can be said of all startup med schools. There have been a couple trying to start up in Las Vegas that have failed. So it really depends on the particular school and who's behind it. So.
Okay.
Can I add
See.
one thing?
Of course.
I have a client who was in the first class for Cal North State, which is a new, relatively new university, and loved the program. In new medical schools, there's often a chance for people who want to take initiative and like start clubs and really make a difference. You know, there's a lot of opportunity for that. So it can be really good. And also the school was, at least that school was very receptive to input from the students as they were trying to, shape the curriculum. So those are all advantages. The one thing that she has had to contend with is that in applying for residency, since it is an unknown school, she has to prove herself more, I think, than a normal, the more established school graduates would have to do. So you're kind of putting a lot of the hard work off for a little bit longer. You've still got to really, as a residency applicant, you have to do a lot more legwork to build up the school as well as to build up yourself. So
Great point. Thank you. And Barry, do you have anything you want to add on this question?
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce the idea of yield, that different medical schools have different yields. So a medical school that's extremely desired, maybe 90 or 80% of the people they offer seats to will accept and finally go to that school. Whereas a new school might have a very low yield, maybe 50% or 30%. And so a new school has the burden of having more interviews and having to admit more people in order to fill their class. Now, I think the Kaiser situation is an anomaly, as Flash pointed out, just because they offer such a good deal. And I imagine the reason they're offering such a good deal is because they're figuring out a way to populate their hospitals. And
They're cherry picking the applicants.
Yeah, no, it's a very smart strategy.
Yeah, so they're getting what they think are the best applicants, and I think it is also a smart strategy. All right, let's move on. We have a few more questions here, and again, I invite our guests to post additional questions. If not, we might move to a slightly different format. How long is too long to apply to medical school after you complete your undergrad degree? I understand you have 5 years before the credits do not count anymore, but I have spent the last year scooping into the business industry and feel like I'm uncompetitive at this point. Any thoughts? Barry, why don't you start with this one?
Sure. Well, I don't think there's a 5-year rule, and your coursework can count for longer than 5 years. What I would advise is to stay alive, both clinically and academically, during the hiatus between ending undergraduate school and applying to medical school. So if you do absolutely nothing clinical and take no extra courses during a period of 5 or 6 or 7 years, that's not going to look good. But if you look like you're an active pre-med and you're thinking about it while you're going through that hiatus, then I think it'll look good. Also, what's the reason for the hiatus? If it's to explore another career and then you realize, no, I want to go into medicine, that's fine. You need to explain it clearly in your personal statement.
Sid, you want to add?
I
Nothing?
totally agree. It's a matter of presenting yourself. And I mean, career changers are, they can do very well in medical school admissions. So.
I think you once had a client who was in her 40s, if I recall.
Yeah, she'd had a legal career. And
right. And Barry, I think you had a client last year who was a PhD in water engineering or something like that. And we've had a variety of clients, definitely much more than 5 years out from undergrad. Flash.
It can be impressive too.
Yeah.
To have done well in a whole other career and then switch. That can be very impressive. Go ahead, Flash. Sorry.
On the University of Arizona admissions committees, on the 4 years that I was on it, we had 2 clients, one of whom was 50. I mean, not clients, people who came to the med school.
Yeah.
Applicants.
Right, applicants. One who was 50 and the other late 40s. And, there's a discussion on the admissions committee because how much is that person going to be able to contribute to society after they've gotten all their medical training. So, if you start at 50, it's, a minimum of 7 years down the road. And then you retire at 65, so you've only had 8 years of practice. And we discussed it, and what we felt was that this person had so much sort of, wisdom from experience that they could contribute to their classmates. So even if they themselves couldn't contribute directly to medicine, they were going to contribute indirectly in very many ways by all the classmates that they could touch. And in practice, that ended up being true. That, it was really great having the sort of, the older perspective within the class. So.
All right, great story. I also just posted a link to an interview that I had. And she wouldn't tell me her age, so I don't know exactly how old she was when she started medical school, but it was much more than 5 years after college, that's for sure. It could have been 15 years after college, easily, maybe 10, 15, something like that. So, you don't, and even there was another recent interview I did, she was also more than 5 years out. It's just not that uncommon. I think what as all the panelists have said, what you have to do is show the relevance, kind of explain your path, and then show that like everybody else, just like I was saying at the beginning, that you're making an informed decision, that you have clinical exposure, that you have a service at mentality, all those things. And then I don't think your being 5 years out is going to be an issue at all. And it may even strengthen your application and help differentiate you. Okay. So good luck with it. Yeah, go ahead.
Consider it as a job interview. What are you going to contribute? Right. So make that case as well. And because you've had that extra experience, you should be able to contribute more.
Okay. Oh, I love this question. This is from an anonymous attendee. As a reapplicant, should you heavily revise your school choice and apply to mostly new ones? Or can you keep many schools the same with a handful of informed changes? A good fit, proximity to family, and friend support identifying with the school's missions won't change. Okay. Tell you what, Sid, you want to take that?
Sure. So I would definitely look at your school choices and make sure that you're applying to schools where you are competitive. If you're not, then yes, you definitely need to revise. But you can keep any of the same schools if you're in, if you're competitive at those schools. Definitely, though, you need, as a reapplicant, you have to show that you have strengthened your application. It can't be just, a handful of changes. It really needs to show that you have taken time to assess your qualifications and that you've been able to strengthen them in some substantive way. So yeah, I think that applying to a lot of new schools is fine, but don't give up on the old schools, especially if you are competitive at those.
Especially if you interviewed, and that would be a sign that they were seriously interested.
That's true. One other thing is that if you did interview at the school, or even if you didn't, some schools do give feedback. This year they may be so busy they won't be able to, but some schools will offer feedback as to how, what else might need to happen for them to take you. It's always good to see if that's an option for you.
Barry and Flash, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. If you interviewed, especially if you interviewed at several schools and you didn't get in, one thing to really think about is your interview skills. And interviewing is very subjective for the interviewee. And sometimes you think you did great, but you didn't get in. And so you might want to get some help in assessing your interview skills and then maybe improving them.
Okay. Flash, do you want anything?
I think, so going back to this theme that you really have to present yourself as a better qualified applicant now. That's going to depend on what you've been doing in the last year. And if you've been coasting, expecting to get into med school, you're going to have to plan on 2 years, right? Because you're going to need to use the next year to build your qualifications and then use those qualifications for an application to the subsequent cycle. So it's really 2 years from now. So.
I would add,
Go ahead.
that many schools in their secondaries will ask you directly if you're a reapplicant and ask you directly, why do you think you didn't get in and what have you changed? So you have to be able to defend that. And as Flash said, if that means taking an extra year, that's fine. That's a much better investment than applying again with essentially the same application.
That was a point I wanted to make. I think certainly, adjusting your school choices may be very appropriate. But that would be one of those things that would need to be looked at on an individual basis. I don't think we can say across the board, you should or you shouldn't. What I can say almost across the board and categorically is that your application should not be the same. Okay. You want to show growth. You want to show development. You want to show improvement. You want to show that you cared enough about the process to invest and improve your personal statement, your MMEs, and your activity descriptions. So where, we'll hem and haw about the list, I'm almost positive that all three panelists will raise their hand and agree with me that the application cannot be the same. Can you raise your hand if you agree with me? Okay. All right. So,
I'd like to
yeah, go ahead.
add a point about this.
Sure.
Sometimes when I'm doing rejection reviews, I can see that the applicant hasn't presented themselves well. So really, they're a good applicant. It just didn't come across. But now this presents a problem for the reapplication. It's like, yes, I can help you present yourself much better, more effectively in ways that the admissions committee will really resonate with. But there's that question on the secondaries, what have you done to improve yourself? And you can't just say, oh, I wrote a better application. So you're kind of stuck. It would have been better.
Well, you're not stuck if you did some new stuff.
Right. Yeah. So you have to have done, significant new stuff, right? And to make that an essential part of your application, make it part of your personal statement. So.
Another thing that I advise, especially for those many of you in limbo at this point, obviously you want to get in this cycle. You don't want to have to reapply. That's perfectly normal. And I actually give this advice much earlier in the cycle. I think it makes a lot of sense for those people who don't know they're going to medical school to be planning to reapply, because otherwise, if you improve your qualifications during the application cycle until you know you're going to medical school and where you're going to medical school, then you may not need to take that second year that Flash was talking about. So I recommend that, almost by the time your secondaries are submitted, maybe give yourself a month or two off for good behavior, but then really start pursuing parallel tracks. In other words, doing everything you can to get in this cycle, going to those interviews, sending update letters when appropriate and as appropriate, but at the same time, preparing to reapply, really assessing what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, give yourself a quick pat on the back for the strengths and work to change the weaknesses so that when this next cycle comes around, you will be ready to reapply if you need to reapply. And if you're waitlisted this cycle, the fact that you've made these changes will improve the chances that you get off the wait list the right way. Okay. All right, let's go back to the questions because some really good questions here. Okay, here's one from an anonymous attendee. What is the lowest GPA and Mcat score that you have seen in an applicant that was accepted to medical school?
I just looked this up on MSAR.
Okay.
The lowest ones are the 3 Puerto Rican schools.
Okay.
If you're Puerto Rican, bilingual, give it a shot. Their MCAT is 494, 493 is the lowest they've accepted.
Wow. That's MD, right?
That's an MD school. Yeah, it's all there's also, if you're a Mississippi resident, 496 could possibly get you into the University of Mississippi. But, the average is 513, or 512.6 or something. So, don't shoot for the lowest by any means. And also, if you're in an overrepresented group, it needs to be even higher than that. So, yeah, I'm cautious of questions like this. There are places where you can get in with really low scores, but that's probably not where you want to go.
And also then you still have to get the residency later on.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to pass the USMLE. So,
yeah.
Barry, what do you have to add to this?
I would add that the the people with these very low MCAT scores may have had some extremely extenuating circumstances and have had compelling applications in other ways. And that you shouldn't just assume, well, if one person got in with a 496, then I can get in with a 496. There's some details to that person's story you probably just don't know. And so it's not fair to compare yourself to them.
Okay. Let's see. We have several good
I
questions.
just wanted
here.
to say something.
Sure, go
about
ahead. Go ahead.
MCAT scores and holistic review. So University of Arizona was one of the first, was one of the 5 schools that trialed the holistic review. And originally, what was supposed to happen was that schools would set minimum MCAT and minimum GPAs. And once an applicant met those, then that was it for the metrics. And then you were supposed to review the rest of the application. That really didn't work out. The University of Arizona ended up raising their minimum MCAT scores. The other thing that I've seen now working with Accepted is that most schools do not practice holistic admissions in terms of metrics. Metrics are all important. And if you got a 512 and you think you could retake the MCAT and get a 517, do it. It'll make a huge difference. It'll get your foot in the door. So.
It also depends on the schools you're aiming for, but yeah, for sure. Great point. Thank you. All right. And I think I'd rather add on encouragement to do better on the exam in terms of the metrics and just focusing on the lowest possible anyways. But all right, here's a question from Morgan. Do you think a strong master's program GPA, MCAT, and Mcat can compensate for some of the struggles we face with competitiveness in the coming cycle? Could I ask you, Morgan, what is your master's program in? I guess, I don't know, is Morgan still here? Yes, she is. Biomedical sciences. Okay. So again, the question is, would a strong GPA in a master's program plus a strong MCAT score compensate for some of the, I guess, some of the impact of the surge? And let's see. Flash, you want to take that?
Sure.
Okay.
I guess the short answer is yes.
Okay.
And it depends on the schools and to what extent they're relying on pre-screening. So some schools will have pre-screens that, they want to see a MCAT of at least 506 and a GPA of at least 3.4 or something like that. And other schools are higher. So it depends on that. So sometimes it's frustrating because somebody might have a lower GPA that might not meet the screen, and yet they're coming in with a 520 MCAT. So it's clear they know their stuff. And a good admissions process will see that, but not all will. So
It does. So, but the bottom line is that you feel it does help, right?
yes, it does help. Yeah.
Okay. Sid, what would you say to that one?
I was going to say it sounds like a special master's program, and if it's one with linkages to a where if you do well in a program, you get an automatic interview at the medical school, then yeah, I think that would be a really, that's probably one of the better ways to overcome a competitive cycle like this. It really depends on what your program does.
Flash? I'm sorry, Barry. So you made a mistake there.
Yeah, I agree with what Sid and Flash said. Beware, though, that master's programs are notorious for grade inflation, and everybody gets a high GPA in master's programs. And so when compared to people in other master's programs, you probably will look more or less the same. It does show good faith that you're enhancing your academics. I think that's good. And As Sid pointed out, some master's programs have linkages and many of them offer clinical experience. So in a way, a master's program can be like a postback program where you're enhancing your application. So yes, that's good, but just be a little cautious in terms of how you interpret your GPA in a master's program.
And again, she was saying that it was combined with a strong MCAT. That was part of it. And one of the things that Morgan added was is at a well-known medical school. So hopefully there's linkage there too. Okay, got more questions here.
Sometimes these
yeah.
programs will have their students take classes with the med students.
Yeah.
And I think that counts for a lot. It shows that, yeah, you can do what the med students can do. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, she added, I take all med classes, no curve either. Oh, that helps. That helps.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is a question from Yuma. Hi, I'm actually preparing to apply in June, but I don't have much clinical experience. I did start to volunteer at Kaiser Permanente early 2020, but because of COVID, the program stopped. So my question is, do I have to wait for next year while I add more clinical experience, or should I go ahead and apply? And to add us a little bit more, I have good stats, GPA and MCAT, just not sure that the few weeks I volunteered will be enough. Okay, what about Barry? You want to start this time?
Yeah, I would feel very cautious about this. The total number of clinical hours is going to be important, and you should have several hundred clinical hours of one kind or another combined. And if you only have like 5 or 10 clinical experience hours, I would wait a cycle and use that year to build up your hours.
Sid or Flash, do you have anything to add?
There's an interesting caveat to that.
Okay.
So I would say it depends on how you define clinical. I had a client this past cycle who had very limited clinical hours, but he did a lot of work with troubled youth. So he was working one-on-one with them. And, and the goal was to get them to overcome some challenge in their life. And that's essentially what doctors do. And he got an early decision, so they bought it. So as long as you are exemplifying what they want from a doctor, then I think that's good. So.
Sid, do you have anything to add?
I kind of have the opposite story.
Oh, really?
Okay.
I have a client who had a great GPA, great MCAT. She applied with 30 hours of clinical experience. She had her whole summer lined up. She was going to be getting hundreds of hours, but it didn't happen. And she's on a few wait lists now, but with her scores in a normal year, if she'd been able to continue her clinical work, I think she would have gotten into several places already. So I think that, you need to be really careful. I think a lot of people, this is what I was saying at the beginning, a lot of people I think thought this year was going to be easier and they were going to make exceptions if you were not able to get that clinical time. And it's turned out to not be that way. So I'd kind of encourage you to do something for this next year to really build up a strong clinical foundation and then apply. I think you'd be more successful.
Scribe, EMT, phlebotomy, work get a job in a clinical setting.
Medical schools want you to know what you're getting into.
Yes.
And if you enter blind, then you're more susceptible to dropping out, and that is a wasted seat. It's hard to fill a medical school seat when somebody drops out.
I just put back the ACE, the primary application, and the importance of clinical exposure is pretty prominent on there. The other thought I had was, I'm not disagreeing with the advice to wait, especially if you really, really want to optimize your application. But I would try, you still have 3 months before June. So if you could get a job, you would really up those hours significantly. And I'm talking now a job with clinical exposure. Or if you even, and also this speaks, I think, very much to Flash's point, Herman Gordon's point, that, if you, let's say, volunteer on a mental health hotline there's no COVID exposure. And there's certainly plenty of need. There's probably more need now than there was before the pandemic. There's contact tracing. There is virtual shadowing, which I realize is limited, and also, frankly, I think of somewhat less value than real interaction with sick people, people taking care of them, people in need, or really serving. That's the one flaw. And Alicia McNeese-Namonkar, another executive consultant, frequently says, the only one benefiting from shadowing is the student. The patients don't benefit, the doctors don't benefit. That's just the student. Now, I'm saying don't shadow, but try and do something else. Right? There's tons of community service opportunities out there right now. Go ahead. What were you saying? I'm sorry.
Well, just that part of what we're talking about is called social justice activities, things that help people but aren't necessarily clinical. And there's lots of those, and they do look good on your application. The other point I wanted to make is that make sure you continue doing, let's say you do get a clinical job and you're doing it for 3 months until the application cycle begins. Don't quit. Keep going all the way through the cycle so that it's clear that you're in it for the long haul.
And this is something you enjoy. You're not just doing it for the application. This is what you're saying is your life's calling.
Right.
Okay. Got more questions here, and we're getting
Another
close.
thing
Go ahead.
Another thing to consider is that you don't have to apply when the AMCAS opens. So you can wait a month. That's not gonna, so you'd be delayed a little bit through the whole cycle, but it's not gonna kill your application. And then that's a whole more month of credentials that you've accumulated. So.
Actually, you might just posted, I was a teacher. That's the only experience I got. Well, teaching, it's definitely service. It may not be exactly what doctors do exclusively, but they do educate. That's one of the things they do. So again, I would try really hard to get that clinical exposure now as much as you can prior to applying in June or July, as Flash suggested. And if you want to apply now, if you prefer to wait a year, then obviously wait a year. Okay. Again, more questions coming in. Here's one, a really good one for Barry. What's the difference between a postback and an SMP?
Well, a postback program, I think there are many more postback programs than SMPs. SMP is a special master's program. And a special master's program, first of all, can be much pricier. They're often $40,000, $50,000 for a year. So that's a very big investment. I would hold an SMP as sort of a last resort for getting into medical school. And I would pursue a postback program, a do-it-yourself postback program or a structured postback program before that, if you haven't availed yourself already of a postback program. Postback programs are wonderful in that you are with a group of like-minded students. There's often really good support. And medical schools like seeing people who have been through postback programs. It's a great way to repair an academic record, and it's a great way for career changers to take all the medical school prereqs.
Okay, great. Sid, do you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, I think the ideal postback programs are those that will offer you the certificate at the end of the postback or whatever, and then let you cover the glide year with research. And many of them will give you a master's after a year of research or so. And that covers the time that you're applying for medical school. So you're not left floundering for a year. So yeah, I agree with Barry. Postback, it's going to improve your undergraduate grades, which is really important. And there's cost savings too. Go for it.
Okay. I just posted a link to an interview that I did with Barry Rothman, who, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a former director of several postback programs at Cal State San Francisco. Whoops, here goes. Okay. Sorry about that. But in any case, the link is there if you want to hear it. And we're going to take a couple more questions.
Oh, could I just add?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you're, say, targeting your state school, so you've got a good chance of getting in, I would try to go do the postback or the master's program there. And the reason is that you will be getting letters of reference from your teachers in that program, and the admissions committee will know those letter writers, and that counts for a lot. Those letters will be much more meaningful than letters from people they don't know. And so I found that this is sort of a nice back door into the med school. So, go to someplace where you want to go to med school that you think you can get in and do a really good job so that they like you.
Right, right. We have a couple of people asking, does clinical research, working as a research assistant or clinical research count as clinical hours? I believe that, well, if you're interacting with people and helping them, then it probably does. What would you say? I'll tell you what, Sid, you want to start with that one?
It depends what your role is. I mean, some
Yeah.
people will be working directly with patients, taking, blood draws, all sorts of more clinical activities, and others don't. So it really depends on your role.
Okay. You want to add anything to that?
I would say the thing to shoot for is patient contact and seeing the workings of the healthcare system, say at a hospital, seeing all the different departments and how the administration works, or at a neighborhood clinic. But if you're, doing data analysis and you're not interacting with people in those situations, then it's probably not as good of a position. One thing you can do is if let's say you have a job where you don't have much contact with the administration or patients, is to ask. Sometimes you can get some extra hours where you might volunteer and get that extra experience without having to find a new job.
Okay, great. And I have a question here from Emily. I graduated with biomedical science in May 2019 from Texas A&M and just completed my master's of marine biology in Australia. I missed human biology throughout my master's and am now applying for medical school. I have mostly pre-veterinary and marine biology based experience, but am confident that medical school is for me after pursuing these passions. I'm gaining virtual shadowing experiences and trying to volunteer in a hospital, but I'm having trouble finding opportunities. Do you think I am applying too early, or can I show my diverse experiences as an asset to my application? Do medical schools value having a One Health background? I'm not quite sure what that means, but I guess I'm not sure what that last part means. But the question is, do you think she's applying too early, or can she show that her diverse experiences are an assets? Anybody want to take that one, or should I cold call again, as I've been doing?
I can take it. I mean,
Go ahead.
Having a One Health background is important, but you also need to have that experience with patients. And so even though it's hard to volunteer in a hospital right now, if you don't have that, I don't think you would be ready to apply. But the one thing that I would be concerned about just from looking at your experience is why you went from veterinary. It just disappeared. Anyway, from one degree to marine biology to veterinary, and it just seems like you might be bouncing around a bit. And so the reasons that you left those fields and the reasons why you chose medicine really need to be clearly conveyed to the admissions committee for you to be successful when you actually do apply.
Okay. Flash or Barry, do you want to add? Nope. Okay.
It's not time for her to apply yet.
All right. All right.
I would say make sure you take some classes that have the word human in their title. Human physiology, human anatomy, just to show that you've switched your direction.
It also seemed from your question that your interest in medical school was almost driven by an intellectual interest in human biology and physiology, not necessarily by desire to serve or to take care of people. So obviously the intellectual curiosity is fine, but it should be coupled with that desire to serve and take care of others. All right. We have a few questions left. I know our panelists are probably getting really tired. So I'm going to take one more. This is from Jim. What type of work do you suggest that students take in the summer in college or available times during pre-med studies to have a better chance at med school? I'll tell you what, Flash, you want to start this time?
Okay, so where is this question? Sorry.
It's
I've been trying
it's at the
pacing back
top
and
actually.
forth.
It's 534. What type of work do you suggest to take in summer or available times during pre-med studies to have a better chance at med school? And this was a parent.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay.
So is the issue that there's not enough time to be doing these extracurriculars?
I think he just wants to know what will be most beneficial to his child. I think it's a son.
I see. Okay. It should be something where it's one-on-one with people. So I actually am very reluctant about most hospital jobs. It's, yeah, you know, your interactions with patients are very brief. I've been a patient in a hospital. You know, these kids are coming around and they're not doing anything. And you know, there are lots of good opportunities. You mentioned the crisis lines. I think I've had about 5 clients this past year who've been working in the crisis lines, and they just say it's, you know, life-changing. You know, they've talked people down from suicide. They've helped people get out of abusive homes. You know, it's just amazing what you can accomplish. And that's much more powerful than, you know, going and getting somebody a glass of water or playing with the
Pushing
kids.
gurneys.
Or I don't even think they even let you do that. But, you know, it's like playing with the brothers and sisters in the pediatric wards. And, you know, that doesn't really count. It's like, you know, you need to be helping people.
Good point. Barry, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thinking about a young person in college and maybe using their summers to gain experience, maybe use it as an opportunity to make sure that they want to go into a medical career and to explore some other offshoots of medicine or other career paths. There's nobody as miserable as somebody who goes into the wrong career because they haven't thought about other options. So as a parent, maybe give them some room to explore other possibilities.
Sid, do you have anything to add?
I think I'm out.
Okay. I just want to add, whatever volunteering you do, don't just do it to check the box. I will never forget, I at one point had a very ill child, and we were at the playroom in the pediatric hematology oncology clinic. And there was a volunteer there. And at the time there were some, you know, toys and games, and there was a video going on the wall. This was before computers were ubiquitous. And, you know, there was no such thing as PlayStation or anything like that. And there was a volunteer sitting there. He was watching the video. He wasn't interacting with the children at all. Mm-hmm. He was wasting his time. And I knew I knew why he was there. And I knew that he was not going to get any kind of good feedback from the people from the people running the clinic. He was completely wasting his time. Every so often they'd call him and say, could you please take this to the lab or the pharmacy or, you know, whatever needed. He was essentially a gopher. But he was just watching the kiddie videos, the cartoons. It was a complete waste of time. So just if you're going to volunteer, give it your all. Okay. Now, just want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Sydney Foote, Dr. Herman Gordon, Dr. Barry Rothman for their excellent information here and their being an outstanding panel. They've been very generous with the time. Question for applicants who are here. What's the most valuable piece of advice, information, or insight that you've received during this Q&A? If you could post it in the chat window, in the question window, whatever you want. Okay. What's the most valuable thing that you've learned during our little over an hour together? Anything stand out? We've covered a lot of topics. About the importance of clinical experiences. That's great. Okay, very good. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? The importance of clinical experiences from somebody else. Well, I guess we made that point. Okay, that's a good one. I'm glad. All right, and let's see. I think somebody else. That's it for now. All right. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, I want to thank you for applicants for joining us also today. If you would like to work with any of the panelists or another consultant, here's what you should do after the Q&A. Visit exhibit.com/medical/services. Choose a service that's right for you. If you're not sure, you'll see an option for a free consultation. Get the guidance you need to present your best self and go from confusion to clarity and from doubts to confidence. Now, some of you may say, isn't accepted expensive? Well, you know what? As about half of you know this, so is rejection. And rejection can be far more expensive than accepted. So let's take a look at the risks of not applying with accepted. Cost of reapplication can easily be several $1,000s, a year of earnings at a much lower level than after you earn your MD or DO degree. And there's the potential that you could have gotten into a better program, however you define that, with greater lifetime opportunities and even more earnings. Now, every year we work with applicants who talked to us a year earlier or came to some webinars or Q&As and decided after taking the do-it-yourself approach and getting rejected that they would work with us on the reapplication. Now, that's fine with us. We're okay either way, but they would have been better off working with us initially, and so would you. But enough from me. What do accepted clients say? I'm going to skip here a little bit. Sid Foot's help was greatly beneficial and definitely paid off. I interviewed at 9 of the 10 schools I applied to and will be attending medical school this fall. I appreciate all your help, and I truly don't think I could have gotten this far without using your services. Or for Herman Gordon, I'm incredibly excited. Herman helps so much with the entire process. He is both brilliant and such a pleasure to work with. And lastly, Dr. Rothman was incredible. We could not have asked for a better advisor to work with. He was kind, considerate, went beyond what we could have ever imagined. I'd highly recommend him to anyone looking for assistance with this process. Imagine yourself in the position of these clients, able to say to friends and families that you are accepted to medical school, knowing that you are going to realize your dreams and start medical school. We'd love to help you as we help the authors of these comments you just saw and thousands of others over the last 27 years. So once again, this is what I recommend you do as a follow-up to today's webinar. Visit or discussion really. Visit exhibit.com/medical/services. Choose a service that's right for you. Get the guidance you need and apply confidently and effectively. And again, to the visitors, to the panelists, thank you very much for your time. To our guests, thank you very much for your time, your answers, your questions, and your participation. I'd like to share a final story, a thought, and question, another question from me to you before we part. The final, the thought. Remember the advice you've gotten here today about acing your primary and allowing the time for successful applications, including the secondary, downpour, and mock interviews, and obtaining professional guidance to reduce your stress and increase your confidence. If you're concerned about school selection, the personal statement, the MMEs, the activity descriptions, the secondaries, the interviews, and the other writing required to apply successfully, and you're anxious about spending the next year or so stressing about this marathon that you're undertaking, remember the excellent advice you've gotten today and your goal to apply successfully and confidently. And imagine yourself in the place of the client you're going to hear from now. He had slightly low numbers, and was stressed and overwhelmed when he came to us. He worked with accepted, and here's what he wrote the year after he had been sitting where you are today. Now, I've been thinking, here you go, about this whole crazy process after being accepted to 3 medical schools. And I know that I wouldn't have had a prayer if it weren't for your substantial help. They say the essays are one of the most important aspects of the application, especially for someone like me whose numbers are a little below average. You greatly distressed an important part of this process that was making me quite anxious. I feel much more confident in my essays after working with you. Slightly low numbers, concerned about the quality and quantity of writing you'll have to do between the personal statement, the MMEs, and the secondaries. If you can relate, then also realize this client did it. He's in medical school, and you can do it too. Take the same steps he took. Get accepted. And now the last question, I know some of the panelists have really had it. So we're going to be quick with this one. The question for you is, you've stayed for the presentation, the pitch, the Q&A. You certainly seem to be interested in what we have to say and the excellent advice you've gotten from the panelists today. But I'm curious, if you're not already a client or planning to become a client, would you be willing to share your reasons for not engaging one-on-one with Accepted? And again, you can do that in the chat window or the question and answer window. I want to thank you also to the attendees who added their comments on my last question. One was importance of sticking to your timeline, not trying to read the trends. And the other one was the importance of choosing your cycle and considerations, etc. All right. So in terms of my last question, why are people engaging? And somebody wrote the cost. Obviously, that's a very relevant reason. As I said in my comments, Accepted isn't cheap, but neither is application. And the cost of rejection can be much higher than our fees. Our minimum fee, by the way, is $330, which is about the cost of 2 applications with secondaries. I'm talking now. So you might think of it as an investment that could prevent you having to spend much more money and delaying your the start of your medical school career, because the longer, once you start your medical school career, or your medical career, not the medical school career, you will be earning more than you are today, or more than you will earn before medical school. So there are real costs involved in rejection. And I think those need to be weighed, as well as the cost of Accepted services. So explore our services. Again, the minimum is $330. We have flat rate services. We have hourly services. If you're not sure which service is right for you, we do offer a free consultation where we can guide you on that decision. And panelists, do you have anything to add to this?
Just to remind people, just as you said, Linda, anybody can have a free consultation with us, and we can help you. We can give you some free advice, and we can help you figure out how we might be able to help you. And there's no obligation. You're welcome to have the free consultation. Right.
Now, Jim is asking, and again, Jim is the parent, when is the right time to register? Panelists, do you want to take that one?
I'll take that one.
Okay, go for it, Flash.
Now is the time to be signing up and getting started on the application. You want enough time that you can write the personal statement, and then weave the most meaningful experiences into it, and then be able to put it aside for a little bit, and just let it incubate, and then come back to it, right? And then rework it a second time. I found that when there's enough time, and there's just enough at this point before the Mcat submission date, that those applications that where the applicant has incubated on it are really much stronger.
Right, right.
It's like writing a paper at the deadline versus been working on it all semester. So.
Well, that's certainly true for what the advice you're giving is great for somebody who's applying this cycle. But I think Jim is the parent of a college student who's, I'm not sure what year the child is in, but I think he's not applying the cycle. He's applying in 2 or 3 cycles. And I would say that the answer is still now. Okay.
Or sooner.
Yesterday, right? Because we can advise, again, I don't remember if it was a son or a daughter. I believe it was a son. We can advise your child, what are the best extracurricular activities to get involved in. Let's say he has a few options. What are the best ones? What research experience should he or she go for? What about community service? What courses? These are things that we can start to work with on. And again, the cost at this point is actually fairly low, because it's, you can get a couple of hours of advising. And then when your child is actually ready to apply, he's going to be in much better shape.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's great to take this time. It could be a period of years to really figure
Son.
out
It is a son.
really figure out the best strategies for the person who's partway through college. It's very similar to what Flash said about the application cycle. You don't want to do this at the last minute. This is not a good process for procrastinators. It's
No.
much better to be proactive and start early.
And an anonymous attendee wrote in terms of response to my question that I guess he or she is comparing the admissions consulting services, identifying my needs, strengths, and weaknesses. And again, that is something that, I'm glad you're comparing the different services. I think it's a great idea. Certainly we offer lots of different options. And I think that just personal fit is important. So as Barry said before, we do offer the free consultation. And I think that should be part of your research and your comparing at this point in time. At least I'd recommend it. Okay. And with that, I want to thank you all for your time. Again, your attendance, your questions, your answers. Really appreciate the insight that you've given me. I hope that the Q&A has been valuable for you and has given you some good insight based on your answers to my questions. It seems like it has. And with that, I just want to wish you, yes, thank yous are coming in, panelists. And I want to wish you good luck with your application. We'd love to be a part of your process. And if you're interested, just go to the website and you have the URL on the screen still. It's not hard to find. So have a very good evening. Thank you again and take care.